We have Steve Kossor. He is with the Institute for Behavioral Change. They provide IBHS, individual, and ABA services in Bucks, Delaware, and Montgomery counties. So,
huzzah!
That's it.
There you go.
Anyway, Steve.
All right, and we're joined by Jim Sharp himself from RCPA. And I just have to say that had it not been for Jim Sharp's presence at RCPA, I probably wouldn't be here. I've made offers to present this material many times in the past. I've been at this for 30 years, and Jim recognized the value of it, so here I am, thanks to Jim Sharp.
Well, we thank you, Steve.
What we're going to talk about today is how to get and keep insurance funding based on treatment outcome measurement. I've been working in the field. I'm a licensed psychologist, certified school psychologist, working for the last 40 years. I actually started doing what later became BHRS about 10 years before it was created in Pennsylvania, where I was having staff under my supervision go into kids' homes and schools, work with the parents, work with the siblings right there where the problems are, and fixing things. It was a beautiful system. And then about 10 years later, BHRS came into existence, and it worked out well for them too. And things have evolved over time. It's become a more bureaucratized system, not a more clinically based system. And now we have IBHS, which will hopefully be fixed when the regulations are reopened to repair the damage that was done. The first concept you have to understand in order to be able to bill effectively for the services that these children need is what is medically necessary. For a service to be funded by an insurance entity, whether it's Medicaid or Blue Cross or any other insurance entity, it has to be prescribed correctly, it has to be delivered correctly, and it has to be evidence-based. Those are standards across the world, actually. All right, so prescribed correctly, I'm going to describe how you prescribe treatment so that it gets funded. And then I'm going to talk about how it should be delivered correctly. And part of that delivery is an essential component is treatment outcome measurement. Not just treatment delivery measurement, but actually outcome measurement. And we're going to talk about collecting data from the parent, not just the treatment provider. Because if you don't collect data from the parent when you're treating children, you don't have outcome data. And I'll explain what that means shortly. The treatment program should be evidence-based. And according to the rules that I've been familiar with for 30, 40 years, evidence-based includes a regularly scheduled, and I'm recommending weekly, data collection process. I'm recommending that there is a problem-solving emphasis, not just on tracking behavior, and that ABA and full fidelity wraparound technologies should be incorporated into whatever treatment you're doing. But let's start with the law. The slide here is talking about 55 PA code 1101.21a, which is where the definition of medically necessary treatment lives in the law in Pennsylvania. And when you read this, you're going to realize you have not heard the whole truth up until now. A service that will or is reasonably expected to prevent the onset of an illness, condition, injury, or disability. That's one of the criteria. There are two others. A service that will or is reasonably expected to reduce or ameliorate. Ameliorate is the word used in the federal language, talking about medically necessary treatment. Ameliorate means to take away the sting, reduce the intensity of symptoms. Reduce or ameliorate the physical, mental, or developmental effects of an illness, condition, injury, or disability. And there's a third one. It will assist the recipient to achieve or maintain maximum functional capacity in performing daily activities, taking into account both the functional capacity of the recipient and those functional capacities that are appropriate for recipients of the same age. The medical necessity criteria in the law in Pennsylvania says a service, treatment, etc. is medically necessary if, one, it prevents the worsening of the condition, or if it treats the condition, ameliorates the problem, or maintains the person's functioning at a level comparable to healthier children of the same general age. Any one of those three criteria means that the treatment is, under the law in Pennsylvania, medically necessary, period. So when you hear people tell you that, well, you're not showing progress, he's not getting better. Okay, that's the ameliorate clause, that's number 2. 1 and 3 still exist. And when you take that information to the authorities, the insurance company, the state, whomever, and you say, no, we're prescribing these services for all 3 reasons. And okay, you're finding they're not making progress. Granted, it's a slow process. But they don't have to make progress in order to justify the continuation of treatment funding. If we're preventing worsening or we're maintaining skills, we have met the medical necessity criteria regardless, this is really important, of what the guidelines say. There's a difference between criteria and guidelines. Guidelines are what the advertising agency promotes when they talk about medical necessity. DHS, the insurance companies, they all talk about the guidelines. We have to follow the guidelines. Well, what happens when the guidelines give you 1/3 of the picture? Well, sure, you're going to follow the guidelines and you're going to try to produce evidence of progress, the kid's getting better, amelioration in their condition. But that's not the whole story. There's more. The Department of Public Welfare in 2007, that's before the department changed its name to the Department of Human Services, they had to issue this clarification in 2007. Now, why do you have to issue a clarification? Well, it's because people were misinterpreting what the rules were. So they issued a formal clarification of the law and the regulations governing EPSDT-funded treatment. That's Medicaid-funded treatment for children birth to 21 in Pennsylvania. And this is what they did. They issued this annex attached to a medical assistance bulletin, and it basically lays out, whoa, look at the language. They copied 110121A and put it on their letterhead and said, this is what's medically necessary in Pennsylvania in 2007. So why don't the guidelines reflect this? It's anybody's guess. I'll leave it up to you to figure out what the PR people are doing in Harrisburg and all the MCOs. All right, so let's talk about how the medical necessity criteria are implemented. There is a document called the Program Standards and Requirements, PSNR. It's updated annually. Every January they push out a new version of it. And every single one since the 90s has talked about medical necessity criteria as described in Annex A, and now talking about what it takes to deliver the services. And you see down here this magic word, or. The guidelines talk about progress, performance, you make better, you get better, you ameliorate, that's all well and good. But then there's this little word, or, that's buried in here, and when you go down, you realize the PSNR is also talking about the medical necessity criteria, not just guidelines, because it has to. The PSNR cannot contradict state law or regulations. It's supposed to be a colloquial description or an interpretation of those laws and regulations. And it's governing what we do in Pennsylvania with Medicaid money to help children who are disabled. All right. And like I said, it's updated annually, and they created Appendix S when they got rid of BHRS. It used to be Appendix T. That doesn't exist anymore. Well, it still exists in the PSNR, but it doesn't talk about BHRS anymore. They created a new Appendix S that talks about IBHS. The guidelines in this PSNR and any other guidelines you may hear do not and cannot change the law in Pennsylvania. So the short version is, documentation of progress is certainly a worthwhile goal, but it cannot replace the other two medical necessity criteria established by the Pennsylvania legislature that make the delivery of EPSDT-funded treatment like IBHS in Pennsylvania accessible to children who are enrolled in Medicaid, who are disabled, and for whom the treatment has been prescribed by a, quote, licensed practitioner of the healing arts under scope of state law who is enrolled in the Medicaid program. That's the law. Now, this is why a certified school psychologist cannot prescribe treatment, because a school psychologist is not a licensed practitioner of the healing arts under scope of state law. A licensed medical doctor is, a licensed psychologist is. And to the chagrin of the people who created IBHS, they couldn't cut psychologists out completely, although they tried desperately to accomplish that. I think my picture's on more dartboards in Harrisburg than anybody can count. So look, the bottom line is, I'm still here. I've been doing this for close to 40 years now. And what I do is I tell the truth. And for that, I get a notorious reputation of being outspoken and controversial. Go for it, sure. Sign me up. I am going to tell the truth no matter what. And to the point of filing a civil rights complaint against the state a few years ago that basically said, no, you can't let the insurance companies write the law. You can't give them that authority. That's not permissible. And they found that, well, there were no violations of civil rights because there were no placements of children in inpatient settings through BHRS. Well, that's idiotic. Of course there weren't. BHRS, when it was the law of the land, did not require that the only reason for its funding was that it would keep kids out of inpatient placements. That's silly. What it was supposed to do is implement the EPSDT mandate, and we'll go through that. The short version is EPSDT says that a child under the age of 21 who's enrolled in Medicaid and disabled is entitled, and it's in fact a civil right, entitled to treatment that is, quote, sufficient in amount, duration, and scope to reasonably achieve the purpose for which the treatment is prescribed. So the bottom line is EPSDT is the big deal in the room. It's never been overwritten, overruled. It was created in 1967 as a means of providing funding for the necessary treatment that kids with disabilities need so that it gets done in amount, duration, and scope at a level that will enable the child to benefit from it. That's the purpose of EPSDT funding. So, when you ask what is medically necessary in Pennsylvania, make sure this is burned into your head because people are going to challenge you. Make sure you can cite where it appears in the law. Let's talk about what an assessment is. Assessment is defined in various places by different authorities, and in a lot of ways it's the same situation that you have a PR firm marketing what assessment is. Those people don't know what assessment is from an experiential or clinical perspective. They know what it is from a bureaucratic perspective. And the problem is the IBHS regulations define assessment in a peculiar way, as if the assessment can only be done once every 6 months or once every 12 months. Do you see that up here? It's not here. These are the IBHS regulations. They do not limit assessment to once every 6 or 12 months. That would be wholly inappropriate. Talk about evidence-based practices. We're supposed to be doing assessments on an ongoing, rolling basis to inform the treatment process. After all, that is applied behavior analysis. No question about that. The Behavior Analyst Certification Board and every other authority on earth understands that assessments are done on an ongoing basis. So why do we have insurance companies saying that, oh no, the assessment can only be done once every 6 to 12 months? Stop. They're misinterpreting the law. They're applying a standard that they themselves created, aided and abetted by certain factions within the Department of Human Services for reasons that remain obscure. Let's just be as polite as we can about it. Why would you limit assessment to a once in 6 to 12 months span of time? Because you can't, if you do it that way, you can't bill for ongoing rolling assessments, which the authorities at the Department of Human Services don't recognize as a necessary component of treatment. That's because they're bureaucrats. They're not clinicians. IBHS is a bureaucratic treatment solution based on a lawsuit. In fact, the IBHS regulations themselves were written by the lawyer who prosecuted the lawsuit and won. They brought her in to write the IBHS regs to make sure that the regs would be in compliance with the decision in the lawsuit. And they falsely claim that they can't change those regulations because they were in response to a lawsuit. It just keeps getting deeper. So what we're going to do is continue to tell the truth about this, continue to hold up these mistaken understandings about clinical issues, and force the changes that are necessary to the IBHS regulations. I'm hopeful they're going to be opened in October, later this month. We'll see, right, Jim?
Yep, we have to update the group at the end of today.
All right. Okay, so look at the bottom here. An assessment can be done if a staff person, primary care physician, other treating clinician, case manager, or other professional involved in a child, youth, or young adult services provides a reason the update is needed. Well, the reason that the assessment is needed is so that ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, can be implemented honestly. If you don't do the ongoing assessment, you can't do ABA. And honestly, the artificial separation between individual services and ABA services that IBHS created is itself a false dichotomy. It's as if there's this red-headed stepchild called individual services that don't have to implement ABA practices, which is indefensible. ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, is not a thing, it's a process. It involves the ongoing data collection and assessment process, and the results of those assessments inform the treatment development process. That's ABA. And if you apply it toward outcomes of social significance, you're doing ABA according to the world's definition. But if you do that same process in programs that are labeled individual IBHS, you can't do that according to the state authorities, because you have to do a watered down and inadequate version of treatment in order to bill individual IBHS. We're going to talk about how to attack that. That's a mistaken understanding. So everybody should be getting ABA. Everybody. If they're a child with a disability, they should be getting an evidence-based practice, not some watered-down almost version. All right. So managed care organizations have their own definitions and standards. What are the odds? And one of those standards for reassessments is the identification and analysis of the member's identified therapeutic needs, including current and new behavioral health symptoms, targeted behaviors and/or skill deficits in measurable terms that are the target of treatment. Lots of words, but it's saying, did you review the treatment plan? Did you review the progress notes? And did you come to conclusions as to whether or not the treatment is progressing correctly? That's an assessment. And if you say as a behavior consultant, we need to assess every single week, you have to be able to do that. The insurance companies have to pay for it as an assessment. And the only thing they don't want to do, insurance companies, is they don't want to waste money. Because their charge, their mandate, the reason they exist is to take a finite amount of money and spread it as far and wide as they possibly can. Everybody gets a mile wide and an inch deep. Nobody ever gets enough to get better, but everybody gets something, and that's why certificates of excellence are distributed like they mean something. The problem you have is that what we've been talking yesterday, several presentations made the distinction between equity and equality. There's a difference. If you say everybody's equal, that means everybody gets a mile wide and an inch deep. They get a little bit of something and they should be happy for it because it's free. That's equality. Equity is the kids who need more should get more because they have clearly documented a need for more in order to get better. My favorite example of this is I met a kid when about 25 years ago. He scored off the charts on the CARS, which is a measure of autism. Flickering the hand in front of the face, not responding to things. He was clearly autistic to the point of what we say now is profound autism, nonverbal, etc. I started working with that child following Stanley Greenspan's model, which predates applied behavior analysis in anybody's book, and implemented a treatment program for that child for 5 years. That young man just enrolled at a local college doctoral program in psychology. He wants to be a psychologist someday. Oh my God. Can you imagine the impact that has on that child's life, family, future? It's immeasurable, right? I'm proud to have had a part in that. Stanley Greenspan had a part in that. He wrote the program. He didn't realize it at the time because he dictated it, and I wrote it down. And I implemented it with BHRS funding, and it worked like a charm long before applied behavior analysis reared its somewhat ugly head and commanded that everybody has to do it that way. It's not necessary to do everything one way. What do we know about the truth? It is nuanced. It's not black, white, up, down, left, right. It's not binary. It's nuanced. And what you have to realize is, so is autism. It's a horrifically nuanced condition. You can talk to people and they say, no, autism is not caused by vaccinations. Well, wait a minute. There are some kids who did get it because of the vaccinations. That's why we have a vaccination court that has handed out over $4 billion in damages for children who were injured by vaccinations and now have autism. That doesn't say that vaccinations always cause autism. Again, it's not black and white. It's not a binary. It's nuanced. So what you have to do is inject into the system that is desperately trying to market itself as if everything is black and white and say, look, it's not. It's nuanced. It has to be done equitably, not equality. The ones who need more need to get more. So we have two kinds of assessment. Now we're going to do a deeper dive into what on earth is assessment really. What do clinicians know that bureaucrats don't know? There are two kinds of assessments. One is criterion referenced, the other is norm referenced. And this has been the case for 150 or God knows how many years. In fact, norm referenced assessments, are you familiar with them? It's the Wechsler scales, the IQ tests. Those are norm referenced assessments. Those have been around for about 150 years. Criterion referenced assessments have been around for 10,000 years. Let me give you a quick example. A criterion referenced assessment compares the performance of children in a particular classroom with the few other children in the same classroom on a test the teacher created. That's a classic example of a criterion referenced test. Mrs. Hales in 7th grade created a test to see if the kids in her class learned the stuff she was trying to teach them. Gave the test out, got the results, scored them, handed them back. Kids did well, kids did mediocre, kids did poorly, and she was able to adjust her training program, let's call it a treatment program, to meet the needs of the children who were underperforming. This is starting to sound like a treatment program, not an education program, right? Criterion reference testing, time-honored, been in the literature for well over 100 years. And then there's norm-referenced assessment, comparing the performance of children in the classroom with lots and lots of other children elsewhere on a standardized test that somebody else created. So you can tell just by looking at this, when you understand it, which is more important, criterion reference testing or norm reference testing? The correct answer to that question is they are both important. You can't throw out norm reference testing. That would be stupid because it has value. It's not the only thing that has value. And by the same token, just because you understand norm reference testing doesn't mean you have an adequate grasp of assessment. Because if you don't understand criterion referenced assessment as a legitimate means of performing an assessment, you're functioning as a bureaucrat. You're selling things as opposed to doing things that are meaningful. In the same way, there are two kinds of data, and most of the people who have gone through graduate school, who are board-certified behavior analysts, who have sterling credentials in the mental health treatment field, have no idea that this dichotomy exists. So what kinds of data do we have? We have treatment delivery data, which is obtained from the treatment provider to show fidelity to the treatment plan. It answers the question, did the provider do what they were supposed to do? Did they treat correctly? That's treatment delivery data. Treatment outcome data, on the other hand, is obtained from the treatment recipient or their parent if they're too young to show changes in the quality of life caused by the delivery of the treatment plan. And it asks the question, did the child benefit from the treatment? And specifically, how did they benefit? Did their quality of life go up? Were there socially significant improvements in the quality of life? So you ask the question, I never forget this, one of the idiots that called me from an insurance company, just idiots is that's the only polite word for it. Tell me what your outcomes of social significance are. We want to have the child socially engage with his peers, with his parents, with his siblings, engage in a appropriate social context. We want them to be free of maladaptive and stigmatizing behavior. Socially significant, right? Oh, no. Here's an example. Ordering meals at a restaurant. Okay, you idiot. I'm never going to write that as a goal for a child's treatment program. Because if the kid is peeing in the corner of the booth, I don't care whether he's ordering his meal with fries or not. It's irrelevant. That's not an outcome of social significance. That's a kindergarten level of understanding. That's A, B, C, antecedent, behavior, consequence. And if we just get that right, if we chase these marbles around on this tray and we herd them all and we pull the behavior marbles off the tray, oh, we're doing applied behavior analysis. No, you're not. You're chasing marbles. The only thing that's of any value is changing quality of life. And that means you have to get at what's causing the marbles to pop into existence on the tray in the first place. You don't chase behavior. You don't herd it. You don't count it. You figure out what the lagging skills and unsolved problems are. This is Ross Greene's model. And you address them. You provide remedial experiences that help the kid stop having lagging skills, stop having unsolved problems, solve them. Give the kid experience, practice, and do it regularly and consistently. The National Academy of Sciences says that if you're working with a kid with an autism diagnosis, you need to do that for 25 hours a week, minimum, year-round, in order to have a reasonable probability of treatment success, period. Now, the National Academy of Sciences did that in 2001. The American Academy of Pediatrics said the exact same thing twice in 2007 and 2012. Unless a child receives a minimum of 25 hours of intensive individualized treatment every single week, year-round, they don't have a reasonable probability of getting better. Period. There's not a comma there. There's not a new study coming, as one of the state people alleged to me at one time. It was an out-and-out lie. There was no new study coming. This was a definitive study sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education in the case of the NAS study that said, look, if you're going to treat kids with autism, whether you use discrete trial training or this or that, or what, they looked at 12 different treatment modalities, and they said they all work sometimes. But none of them work adequately if they're delivered less than 25 hours of intensive individualized treatment every week, period. So how do you get insurance companies and some providers and some state authorities saying, we're going to authorize 5? Where do you get 5 from 25? That's called marketing. That's not called science. It's not called clinical. It's not even bureaucratic. It's marketing. And the people who don't understand the law, don't understand clinical terms, and don't understand honesty will do their time marketing stuff that they wish were true. More power to them, or actually less power to them. That's the mode of the day. We need to stop letting these people lie to us and hold up the truth and say, no, it says this. And if they say 25 is the minimum, what about 35 hours a week? That's 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's 9, 10, 11, 12. That's a school day. 35 hours is the minimum that some kids need in order to have a reasonable probability of symptom abatement. It's funded under Medicaid EPSDT. All right, so here's an example of, this is treatment delivery data. This basically captures the child's treatment plan and reduces it to a single sheet of paper where you're doing hash marks. And you're doing frequency counts. How often did they do this target behavior? How many times did they do the replacement behavior? And you're doing things like measuring how close was the staff person to the child. Good to know, right? And then you're also measuring the level of prompting that the child was receiving from the staff member. So what do we know about titration? Titration means watering down, thinning out. If you have a program that reduces the distance to the child, you're not titrating, you're increasing the intensity of service because you're doing it from a closer perspective. But by the same token, if you're doing it farther and farther away, that is titration. And in the same way, the level of prompting. If you have to do physical guidance, that's a really intense level of prompting. But if your goal is to do it with a verbal reminder, a cue from across the room, now it's a gestural prompt, which is way less intensive than a verbal or even a physical prompt, right? That's how you do titration. So that you can have a kid getting 35 hours of intensive individualized treatment happening at a farther and farther distance until you go outside the room and you stay in visual contact to see if you're still needed. You do that for a couple of weeks, and if you're not needed, that's when you reduce the amount of time spent with the kid. You don't come up with some crazy Nostradamus-inspired titration schedule that in 8 months or 3 months or 3 weeks you're going to go from 20 to 15 to 10 to 5. That's, forgive me, I'll be as polite as I can, that's idiotic. That's a kindergarten level of understanding. It's a bureaucratic understanding, not a clinically informed one, and certainly not evidence-based. All right, so that's the first page. The second page is where you have a more nuanced understanding of exactly what the kid did. And you're recording the child's response and the caregiver's involvement in treatment. It's a narrative statement. Over here, you're checking boxes to say what you did, what the interventions were, so that as a result of these first 2 pages, you have a complete and contemporaneous record of service delivery, which is a requirement by the funding agencies. And as a result of that, you can say, was the treatment delivered in accordance with the treatment plan? Hallelujah, they did it right. That's treatment delivery data. It's not treatment outcome data, because treatment outcome data comes from the treatment recipient or their parent. This is how we can score treatment delivery data for a week. And if you do that, it'll take you about 15 minutes. It's an analysis of behavioral health technician records. It's BHT progress note review. It'll take you 15 minutes, assuming things are going along well. It may take you 30 minutes if things are not going well, and your job is to make them go well, because you're doing an assessment process on an ongoing basis that will inform the treatment delivery program. All right, takes you all of 15 minutes to do this. And then we talk about an analysis of parent data, assessment of the child's progress. This is a scale I created. I've had no end of training in statistics and behavioral analysis, and I'm not a board-certified behavior analyst. I'm a licensed psychologist. So my training is way deeper and way broader than any behavior analyst I ever met. The bottom line is, when you understand experimental design to the extent that I do, you can realize that it's possible to collect parental data once a week that takes you about 15 minutes, and then you can use that data, that treatment outcome data, to answer the question, is the kid getting better? Has their quality of life gone up? And I'm going to show you before we're done today how to do that. With the parent analysis of progress, it's the parent's opinion that matters, not the provider's opinion. It's what the parents say. So sometimes parents will say, well, I don't really know. I mean, I'm not in the school. He's getting services in the school. How am I supposed to know? Wow. You picture my mother, 50, 70 years, whatever? No. Parents were not ignorant about what's going on in the school back then. They sure as hell are now, because schools have gotten really, really good at suppressing parental involvement. That's all there is to it. They have been doing that for 50 years, and they've gotten to the point now where parents, even high-level educated parents with degrees in education, are willing to let schools just do what they can during the school day. Sometimes it's the worst thing possible, where the kid acts up in school at 8:30 in the morning and the parent takes it out on them at 4 o'clock when they get home. I mean, it makes no sense. But that's what some schools are doing. They reward everybody in the last half hour of the school day, regardless of when the behavior problem happened or when the excellent behavior happened. It's just, again, it's a bureaucratic system done to support a bureaucracy, not to educate and not to treat children with behavioral problems. So what do we got here? We have a situation where the parent is rating the child on a scale from 1 to 10. And you can see that this is a 6.5, this is a 5.5, that's a 5. So you can see over time, circle, square, triangle, you can follow the graph and you see you get ups and downs. What on earth happened here? This is a weekly report from the parent about the child's display of target behavior. That's a very important concept. I'm not tracking good behavior, I'm tracking bad behavior. First of all, it's a lot easier to track bad behavior than it is good behavior. It's very clearly limited by the treatment plan. You got 3 goals, 3 domains, 3 categories. Track them. See what the parent is saying about the kid's development of those skills. So when you get a parent who says, well, how am I supposed to know? I wasn't at the school. Well, you were as a professional. The BC was at the school, goes every week, whatever. So you take the data to the parent and say, the school is reporting that your child scored on a scale from 1 to 10, he scored a 6. Well, what's a 6? Well, you can look at the actual chart and realize a 6 is distinguishable from a 5 or a 4. If it's a 6, it can't be a 5 or a 4 or anything else. It can only be a 6 because it's based on an interval scale of measurement. And once you use an interval scale, this is Statistics 101, you are able to make definitive statements about whether or not significant changes occurred, period. If you use a nominal or ordinal scale, you can't make those statements. That's what a typical Likert scale is. Always, sometimes, never, whatever. I created a scale using an interval scale of measurement that lets you define exactly where the kid's level of involvement, frequency, and severity of target behavior has been in the past week. This is not like a CANS or a CARS or something that measures change over months of time. It's weekly. It is an assessment tool that is standardized. It's in the book that's available on Amazon since 2019. It's a standardized scale that I created that's been used for a decade. And now we have all this data. It's reliable. It's valid. Of course it is, because it uses a single subject with repeated measures, experimental design. Now I'm talking way over the head of every board-certified behavior analyst I've ever met. Again, we're not doing kindergarten level chasing marbles on a tray trying to figure out A, B, C and how many times it occurred. This is way beyond that. It's looking at quality of life based on target behavior incidents. So what happened up here, where it's up, yes, 9s. Good God, if you look at the scale, a 9 is an overinflation. A 9 is one step short of a hospital admission. It wasn't that bad, it was overinflated. So the parent is not using the scale correctly, and there are ways of adjusting that. So it's reliable, it's valid. But let's say the 9 is, for the sake of argument, correct. What on earth produced that? And you find out when you do the inquiry, it's because grandma came to visit those weeks. And when grandma's in the house, it's grandma's rules, and she loves her babies. The reason grandparents and children get along so well is they have a common enemy. All right? So, you know, I've been around long enough to see this, right? Okay. So grandma goes back home and the target behavior drops down. This is called a treatment effect. And if you see that happening in the kid's life, and if this is a span of time over 3 years, and the treatment effect is now here, and it used to be there, you've shown a statistically significant reduction in target behavior. That's a win. That's improving the quality of life. It's a socially significant improvement, period. There's a period at the end of the sentence, perhaps even an exclamation point. And the insurance companies get this. Once you explain it to them, they realize. In fact, I've had some insurance company people say, we don't ever have to argue with you about stuff. We won't argue. You show us the data, 35 hours a week, ka-ching, we'll fund it because the kid's getting better and you're proving it. So now they can say, yeah, we had to pay him because look, he showed us the data. I mean, what are we going to do? You know, so now the insurance companies are happy to pay the bills for kids who are getting better. They loathe paying bills for people who are not getting better. And that's what I'm trying to get across today in this presentation. If you know what you're doing, you can prove that the kid's getting better and that it's because of what you're doing. You use treatment delivery data to show that you're doing what you're supposed to do, and you use treatment outcome data to show that the kid's quality of life is going up.
I have to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're looking for progress. Everybody's looking for progress, whether you're the treatment team, the insurance company, the government. Everybody wants progress. But they limit the assessment. So they're diametrically opposed. But you're doing this weekly. Isn't the idea, or is it conceivable to say that the increased assessment actually can reduce the amount of time a child potentially could be in care?
Absolutely. Yeah, but if you do the assessment weekly and you get, well, he's a 2, he's a 2, he's a 2, that's it, you're done. And you can definitively shut it down, no matter how much the parent says, he's entitled to 40 hours a week, or whatever their shrill, whatever they learned from their advocate, who didn't understand science or anything except how to market themselves. No matter what somebody claims to be entitled to, they are not entitled to anything more than treatment that is sufficient in amount, duration, and scope to reasonably achieve the goal for which it is prescribed. That's what they're entitled to. And when you show them that, hey, look, your own numbers say he's finished. Wait a minute, I didn't mean it was a 2, it's a 7. Stop. We're also taking treatment delivery data. And when the treatment delivery data says it's done, and the treatment outcome data says, oh no, I still need it, that's called non-collaboration. And you can administratively terminate treatment without risking a lawsuit by documenting non-collaboration. Look, we tried to show the parent how to use this scale. It's norm referenced. No, it is published. It is a standardized scale. We're not changing it week to week. It's the same scale we've used for the last decade. And this parent is misusing it for reasons that remain obscure. But when there's a dichotomy between treatment delivery and treatment outcome data, you can advise the parent that we can't continue this treatment program. There are other providers that don't even take treatment outcome data. Be my guest. There's a load of them. And maybe they'll fund your child's treatment, but I doubt they're going to get funding for more than a few hours, maybe 5 in a week. We've been doing 20. And it's not justifiable anymore. He's done, period. 15 minutes a week to do that. It's not like you got to devote hours and hours and hours to do an assessment. It's a very short time. Okay, so I talked about a single subject with repeated measures, experimental design. It uses interval data, not nominal or ordinal. It permits sophisticated statistical analyses to make reliable, valid statements about the effect of the treatment on outcomes. That's what I created. I call it, humbly, the Kossor Scale. I work with the Institute for Behavior Change. We've been around for 25 years or so. That's the URL to log on. You can download a great deal of information. There's some stuff at the back of the room, free stuff, as well as both of the books that I authored at a terrific discount. These are our values. Number one, tell the truth. If you don't tell the truth, you have no value. I'll make that as a truism. Tell the truth, but you have to know what the truth is, and a lot of people don't know and think they do, so they're actually spreading myths or marketing information rather than truth. You have to be thankful for the opportunity to help kids get better. You have to help them. You have to share fairly, and that means parents have to collaborate with you. They can't give you the responsibility of fixing their kid while they're at the spa. That's no collaboration there. And finally, you've got to be moving forward. That doesn't mean you're necessarily making progress. It means you're moving forward toward the discontinuation of treatment because it's finished. You don't stop until your work is finished. This is some information about my credibility and my background. This is a description of EPSDT. You can see that mental health care is a mandatory part since 1967 of EPSDT funding. This comes with strings attached. Treatment has to be sufficient in amount, duration, and scope to reasonably achieve the purpose for which it was prescribed. That's it. That's in the law. So an insurance company saying, no, the purpose for this is to keep kids out of institutions. Lie. You know, the Department of Justice takes this stuff seriously. And when officials in their official capacity make claims that are not true, that's called unsworn falsification to authorities. And when you're talking to the Department of Justice, that's a federal authority. Oops. Medicaid is a keg with two taps. The school gets this enormous pipeline that draws Medicaid funds like there's no tomorrow, no insurance company oversight, nothing. But you've got this other tap that can go into the lives of children. Regardless of what the school's taking, it has no impact on it. And here's that in writing. Any money going through the top tap has no impact on the funding for the school. We do studies, we do outcomes, we do tests, we measure the effectiveness of our treatment programs, and the bottom line is we have proven over the last decade or more that you can't drive a tack with a toothpick. If you try to drive a tack with a toothpick, you break a lot of toothpicks and you conclude the kid can't be fixed. That's the state of the art. That's what certificates of excellence go out for. You have to treat equitably, not with equality. This is the Kossor Scale. You'll get it. It's in that book back there. It'll be included in this presentation. This is how we score it. This is how we do a graph of it. And we can go through in detail, if only we had more time, to describe exactly how it's done. Like I said at the very beginning, truth is nuanced. There's not just a black or white, up, down, one way or another. It's not binary. There's a lot of depth to this. What we showed in this example is the child moved down to a level of about 3. 2 is the level of normal or typical for a child, or even tolerable for a child of that age. When you get to a 2, you have to stop because there's no justification to continue. But as long as you're moving toward that goal, no matter how long it's taking to get there, you can continue to expect and get treatment funding. There you have it. That's the book. It's available on Amazon for $15, but today only, it's for $5 at the back of the room.
Fantastic. So I have just a question and a statement. Steve is part of our IBHS work group. It's the group that is really my first real work group. And bringing on Steve about a year into it, it kind of changed the complexion of where the group was going. And I think the one thing that Steve prepares people for, whether he's consulting, part of a committee work, or even today, is that the law is actually on your side. And referencing the medical necessity when you are challenged on that has an impact because they can't fight the law, and there is recourse to that. I reference Steve, I consult with Steve on cases with great frequency. Many members come to me and I refer them to Steve. It's worth taking the time. If you have the question or you have a concern or you're not sure, you can reach out to RCPA, many members of our IBHS group who I consider the experts in the field at the state are part of that group, and Steve being one of them. So thank you for your presentation. I don't say eliminate questions, but there was a reference early on about the IBHS regulations. They had their 3-year promulgation anniversary in October of last year. RCPA's work group had been working on those regulations and recommendations for reform probably at least a year in advance of the anniversary date. We submitted those recommendations. They were accepted by the Independent Regulatory Review Commission for Pennsylvania, who promulgates all PA regulations. And it was accepted for review, which is the first time in the history that a reg was, at its first anniversary date, was open. As of late last week, the review has been open. They have requested documentation from OPSOS and DHS around each one of our regulatory pieces, so we are moving on.
Great success.
Yep. So I didn't want to take away from any questions that anyone might have.
I just have a question. Do you utilize this for individual services as well as
Yes.
individual?
Yes.
Okay, and so do you grapple with the discrepancy between like in ABA, all of this work that you do is available, and in individual it's not? And
It's no secret that the individual program was targeted for extermination by the IBHS regulations. That's one of the worst things about them. When I attempted to tell the authorities, look, I'm going to do ABA for everybody because that's an evidence-based practice, and I'll bill at the individual rate because it's enough. I can get by if you'll let me do ABA level data collection. So what do you say? Believe it or not, the insurance company said, oh no, if you're doing ABA, you got to bill for ABA. Well, okay, but that comes with the baggage that you have to have a board certified behavior analyst, and you have to have all of this other infrastructure. Frankly, if that little guy had had that baggage 25 years ago, I doubt that he'd be enrolled in a doctoral program in psychology. Because frankly, none of that matters. The board certified behavior analysts that have been vaunted as the necessary level of care to get quality treatment, there's no evidence that says that's true. What you need, what the evidence about what's effective therapy, treatment, for the last 100 years is a relationship. If you have a therapeutic relationship with a client, you're going to help him. He's going to get better. If you don't, if you have reduced the client to a number or a quantity of behavior, they're not going to get better. You're going to have good data maybe, or you're going to have an abundance of data. Whether it's good or not remains to be seen. So the answer is yes, you can do in an individual program data collection, provided you do it face-to-face, do it on the kitchen table. Right. I mean, that's idiotic. You have to write a treatment plan on a kitchen table for it to be a valid treatment plan. Are you kidding? Again, that's the disparity, individual versus ABA, that's indefensible. It's literally saying, we're going to have an evidence-based standard for kids who are in ABA programs. That's code for they're autistic. And we're going to have some bargain basement garbage standard for anybody else who really doesn't deserve anything more. So, I'll be here for the rest of the conference. My email's up there on this slide. By all means, send me an email, set up a conversation where we can talk, and I will be happy to do whatever I can to help you do what I've been doing and defend it.
Thank you.
And we're out.